Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 80 of the Stephen King podcast. Wow, it's almost a celebration.
Almost, yeah.
As usual, with me here is Lou. Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. And today we're going to have another guest. Simon Mason from the UK is here, and he is going to talk to us about collecting first editions, variants of different books, and all those things. And we're going to have a very interesting chat with him later on.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and it's a whole new world opening up for everyone who isn't into collecting.
Yeah.
But as usual, let's kick off with the news.
Welcome, welcome. Do not fear the door that lies before you. We will protect you. We are your guides, Hans and Lou, and we will give you the latest in Stephen King news. But before we do so, you must prove yourself worthy. You must open the door and join us in the death room.
Alrighty. And first up is I don't know if it was last podcast, but the podcast before, we had mentioned that Josh Boone had been attached to do an adaptation of, or here was...
No,
it was, the Talisman.
Yeah,
Talisman, sorry. So he's been attached to so many, I have trouble keeping track of it all. And of course, we all greeted that with sort of mixed response because the Talisman's had about 3 or 4 kicks at the can already and just can't seem to get out of development hell. And we were also perturbed because he had been attached to 2 other King projects, of course, The Stand and Revival, and Lisi's story. Yeah. So, and that was, I think the first time we talked about that was like over a year ago. And then, of course, he got involved with a New Mutants project. And so we were like, okay, whatever. He's kind of blasé, the news to us. But then, and then I had mentioned in that podcast that it'd be nice if he would give us an update. And I'm pretty sure that he updated us before our podcast came out. In fact, I know he did. But it's nice to know that he was thinking of us because he actually went on the Stephen King official forum and posted that his update on The Stand, because somebody had made a remark about, well, he's not even working on it anymore, and the version I read was pretty bad. But he posted, "Hi, Josh Boone here. I happened to come across this," and that was that post, "and wanted to say that I never wrote a draft of The Stand with anything but the ending from the book. You are referring to a draft that preceded me, which I actively worked to ensure never got made because it was in no way an adaptation of the book, just fan fiction. I am still working on The Stand, and we'll be making it next as soon as New Mutants opens in April as a limited series. I've been working on it for 4 years, and I promise you it will be a faithful adaptation of the book with an incredible cast." So, yay.
Yeah, that sounds...
That's my reaction.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, it sounds very positive. It sounds to me that they have left the idea of 4 films and making it a limited series. Yeah. Limited series is usually, if I'm correct, a 1 season, 10 to 12 episode TV show. So, and I think that's even better than 4 films, I think. And it seems he knows who is going to be cast in it, since he says it's an incredible cast, or he's just very confident that he will be able to get a great cast. But definitely sounds interesting that he is still working on it and ready to go ahead with it in April.
Yeah, I think he's doing a little bit of showmanship with the incredible cast, because there's no way you can work on something and lock in cast members for that long of a period before actually going into the project. So I'm sure he will still have to actually cast The Stand once he gets past the New Mutants. But I'm glad to hear that he's still involved. And Josh, if you're listening to our podcast, thank you very much for giving us an update, because as King fans, it's very frustrating to hear these projects announced and then not to hear anything for years on end sometimes. So, and I still go back to that podcast he did with Kevin Smith on Hollywood Babylon. Really sounds like he knows his King stuff and has a really good grasp on the material. So I'm really hoping that we do get to see this. I still like the 4-movie idea, but if they want to do it as a television series as well, I'm fine with that. And I think, obviously, recent series like Game of Thrones or whatnot have proven that you can do epic on a smaller screen and still take the time with the characters. So, which is the strength of King's material. And I think a lot of times when it's adapted cinematically, it doesn't work because the character stuff gets dropped and they just try to build up the action beats, which just doesn't work as well for the source material. So we'll have to see how it goes, but that is definitely great news, and hopefully he'll work on this before he does any of the other King projects that he's attached to.
Yeah. Which would you prefer if it was made like a one season show in 10, 12 episodes, to have one each week or have them all at once?
I actually think as a limited series, like I understand your definition of one season of maybe 10 to 12 episodes, but I would actually like to see maybe 3 or 4 seasons of 10 episodes or something like that. Mm-hmm. One handling each section of the book, because the book's broken down into 4 sections. I think you could make 4 seasons of that, maybe 8, 10 episodes each, because content providers are looking for material all the time. I think to do this book as a 1-season miniseries, I think obviously it's been done before and you could do it, but I think you would want to maybe make it, maybe 4 is too many seasons, but I think 3 seasons of maybe 8 episodes, something like that, would be my preference if they're not going to do the movie version.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just hope they don't do it too long, so that they have to invent new stuff just to fill out the time.
I think with an 1,100-page book, they can they can easily, because if you think that it's basically the rule of thumb for a script is a page, it takes 60 seconds usually, so 1,100 pages, that's 1,100 minutes.
Yeah.
that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's move on to the next one, and it's the Dark Tower, and actually the Dark Tower movies that it doesn't seem to want to stay dead.
Nope.
Idris Elba is talking about a second movie in an interview recently, and he says that there is definitely talks about a second movie, which sounds a bit strange to me, but hey, he's involved with it, so he should know. He also mentioned the TV show that is supposed to be based on the 4th book, Wizard and Glass.
Mm-hmm.
But he seems to be positive that there are talks about a second movie, and I guess we'll have to see. Personally, I am very skeptical to that they are actually doing a second movie.
Yeah, well, I mean, as an actor, you always want to keep your options open, so it only makes sense for him as the star of what it could be a potential franchise if they get the right people behind the camera and the right approach to it. He wants to stay involved. Counter to what Elba is saying, though, is, and we have to believe that he's a little more in the know, Stephen King has also been on record over the Sleeping Beauties tour, and I think he put up a quick clip of it on. I'm sorry, that was about the Dark Tower, but I'm sure he said in interviews that he believes that the TV series will be a reboot. Mm. So they basically will ignore the movie. Now, whether they want to keep the same cast for that might be confusing. So Elba might be out. I do think that Tom Taylor will be out because he's too old now. Yeah. Unless they really want to age up his storyline, which to me takes a lot of the power away. But if you do it as a TV series and get a younger kid, because we've seen a lot of good kids like you, I don't know, I'm watching the 2nd season of Stranger Things, and wow, that cast of kids is just amazing. And we saw it with It as well. Mm-hmm. So kids, actors can carry a project nowadays, and it's really important that they get, I think, to try to stay within that 10 to 12 year range of finding a kid to play the part. Yeah. I feel bad for Elba and McConaughey and Tom Taylor because whatever people might say about the movie, the issue was not with the actors. I thought they all really played their roles as to the best of their ability with what they were given to work with. So, but I think at this point, given how the movie, and I think the movie's made over 100 million, so it might have broken even or not nearly as in the red as we might be led to believe. So that's the blessing in disguise there. But I think the appetite, like I think there was proof there to the studios that there's appetite out there for this story.
Yeah.
But with Game of Thrones getting into the last season or something, they need something to replace it. And I'm not talking about just HBO, but I'm talking about be it Netflix or Hulu or HBO or AMC. All their hits are been on for 8+ years, so they need something to replace it. And this Dark Tower story is just sitting there begging to be adapted in some way. So we'll just have to see how it plays out. But I believe within the next 5 years, we're going to get another readaptation of the Dark Tower series, be it in movies or TV. And it'll probably be quicker.
Yeah, and we talked about this earlier as well, that the way to save this is to do a total reboot and do what Hollywood is best on, just forgetting that the first movie actually exists. So I think that might actually work. So hopefully that's what they're planning to do.
Yeah, and considering that Sony cut that movie down to 90 minutes, it's almost like they forgot that the original shooting exists too. So
yeah,
because there's stuff in those trailers that looked really cool that we never got to see in the movie, like McConaughey walking through the snow with all those dead bodies and whatnot. Mm-hmm. That's not in the movie. The way the beams were hitting the tower, they were going straight up to the beams, not actually hitting the tower itself. So there's a lot of things that are not in the finished product. So
yeah, and the Blu-ray and DVD versions will be out now in 2 days from when we record this, and maybe they will give us an insight to what we didn't get to see in the movie.
Yeah. And as we touched briefly upon, we reviewed it in this episode when we talked to Simon, and plus we reviewed the book. If you look at The Art of the Dark Tower, there's definitely a really good movie in there, or sure looks like it from the production work. Yeah. But yeah, unfortunately it didn't play out that way.
Nope.
All right, so this is a really short news segment, and this is our last news item, and we have some Castle Rock set photos for the upcoming Hulu TV series, which we still don't know specifically in 2018 when it's coming out, but it is coming out next year. So there's not much there. There's the Castle Rock Police Department, which is a pretty generic looking building, red brick building. Yep. And then there's a production sign. Please pardon our appearance. Thanks for your cooperation, Castle Rock. And then we have the Castle Rock Pizza Factory. So, but beyond this and the trailer that we got, which is really edited with a lot of fast cuts, and it makes it hard to understand what's going on. But I think it must have something to do. It centers around Bill Skarsgård's character, who's a prisoner of Shawshank, and the sinking of that Shawshank police car must play into a lot of what or drives maybe the narrative of the story. So we'll have to see. Yeah,
and I guess it will be a totally new story, and we'll recognize some of the characters and maybe some of the places and stuff like that. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see when it's out.
Yeah, and that is the news.
Yes. Okay, today's guest is Simon Mason from the UK, who is a big collector of Stephen King. I guess we should say stuff, or is it just books? We'll find out. And we're going to talk about collecting and what kind of collecting you can do, and different version of books and stuff like that, and what you need to get and what you don't need to get. So welcome, Simon.
Hi. Thank you for having me on, Hans.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into collecting Stephen King.
Okay, so I've probably been a fan of Stephen King's work for well over 40 years, which probably gives a bit of an indication to how old I am. But it's probably only been the last, I'd say, 10 to 12 years that I've really seriously got into collecting his books. I don't collect anybody else. Stephen King is the only thing I collect, and it is. To your first comment, it's pretty much books. I do have some other things, but it's mainly books that I collect. And those would be the sort of US and UK first editions, as well as the limiteds as well. So why did I start collecting? So a while back in my youth, I'd kind of read a couple of his books. I'd read Carrie, I'd read Salem's Lot. But then I I only really read them in paperback. And back in the 80s, I suddenly decided, wouldn't it be nice to have, a bookshelf full of hardback books of Stephen King? And I was leafing through a magazine, and I discovered a book club that was basically advertising that they could offer me 10 free books, any free books that I wanted if I signed up. So, of course, I looked through the catalogue, and lo and behold, I could get a whole range of Stephen King books. So I joined the club. And little did I know at that time, just how completely worthless a book club edition was. But, beginner's mistake. But that really kicked me off. I started sort of adding, as new books came out, I bought them as a first edition, and I kept adding those to my shelf. And more recently, I've sort of replaced all of those BCEs with actual first edition books in as really top-notch condition as I could find them, really. So I've now pretty much got, in fact, I have got every US first edition, every UK first edition, and a lot of the signed limiteds, or at least the ones that I'm interested in anyway. I don't collect anthologies. That's the one thing I don't collect.
It's interesting what's worth and what's useless when it comes to collecting, because is there a different for you when you what I want to ask is, do you collect because they are valuable, or do you collect because you want the book? Do you know what I mean? Because the difference with a first edition and a book club edition.
Yeah, so the difference between a first edition and book club edition to pretty much a layman is absolutely nothing. They would look at a book, and they would probably look at a book club edition and think, well, that's nicer because it looks almost brand new. But for a collector, really the only thing, certainly speaking for myself and speaking from other collectors that I've spoken to, really the only thing that you're interested in is a first edition and the first printing of that edition. So most times it would actually state first edition, or it would have a number line that was the full number line, including a 1. They really are the only books that I would be interested in. And as to value for me is secondary. I've always been a bit of a collector, so I like to have a complete collection of something. So when I buy a book, and this has happened over years where I've got more and more experience as a collector, whereas before I would just try to fill a gap and get whatever book I could. Now it would have to be as really good quality and condition as I could potentially afford. Because what happens is you live with that book for a while, and sooner or later something better comes along, and then you end up buying it again. So really, as I say, with experience now, I'd kind of wait and find as good a quality as I could get.
But that indicates still, though, that you are in the future maybe planning on selling the books?
No, I don't think I would ever. I mean, I never say never. If my life situation came to the point where I needed to have money desperately, which touchwood is not a problem at the moment, then yeah, I mean, my family's more important to me than my books are, but that's probably the only thing. For me, this collection won't be sold. I might sell a book in order to get a better version of that book. I have done that in the past, but for me, this is a legacy that will be passed on to my children. What they do with it, I don't know, but I don't plan on selling any of my books other than to replace them with better books.
It's interesting because I really can't consider myself a collector compared to you and a lot of other people who have great collections. But I remember when I started getting all the books by King, I couldn't afford to get all the hardbacks, so I got all the US paperbacks. And I mean, in a collector's view, those are probably worthless. But for me, they are kind of okay because I plan on keeping them, and I really the value of the book itself isn't that important. It's more that I want a complete set of King's books. Mm-hmm. How would you say that is different from a collector like you and a collector like me? Is there anything in your collection that you collect for that isn't worth much in terms of money?
Right now, yeah, there's probably quite a lot of books, and some of the latest books that King has released over I suppose probably the last 5 to 10 years, they don't have a huge amount of value. And we'll go on to talk about Sleeping Beauties a bit later on, I think. But right now, you can pick that book up for £10, or at least you could before they stop the half price sale. So those books don't have a value, but they don't have a value yet because they are too new. But 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line, they'll be sort of fetching similar prices to books that are picked up in the 90s do now. And those books that were available in the 90s, they will have an increased value. But I suppose I have a few books that I don't really consider to be valuable, but I'd still like them to be as pristine as possible.
Yeah.
For me, a condition is a big thing when I look at a book, because I'm not going to be reading these particular books. I have read everything that Stephen King has pretty much printed. I've either read it as a sort of a book that I've got another copy of, or in the last few years I've read it on the Kindle. But the books that I collect now, they are for my collection and not for my reading. And I know Stephen King would probably really be upset about that because he likes people to read his books. But I still read the book, but I have my collection. It's a kind of a two-way thing.
What would you do? Just a hypothetical question. Say there were a new book released in a very limited edition, and it was extremely expensive, so there was no way you could buy 2 copies of it.
Yeah.
Would you buy one and place it in your collection and not read it, or would you buy it and read it?
Are you saying there's absolutely no other way that I would have to be able to read this book?
No, you have to read this copy. You only have enough to buy 1 copy.
I would read it, but I would read it very carefully.
Yeah.
With gloves.
Yes.
I just had to ask that question.
So yeah, the story is the most important. But so I would have to read it. Absolutely have to read it.
Yeah.
So Simon, I'm wondering if you could just clarify for me and maybe for our audience as well, why are book club editions not worth anything? Like, aren't they kind of like a limited run in themselves, or? No,
they do tend to be a smaller print run than potentially the initial release of a book. But right. they tend to be inferior in a few ways. They're normally printed on much lower quality paper, and so they won't last. They will age very quickly. You'll find that the pages will begin to yellow. They don't potentially have the original book cover,
right.
the slip jacket. So there's normally changes to that. But as a book, I mean, it has the story. If all you're interested in doing is reading the story, then absolutely go and buy a BCE. You can pick them up on eBay for pennies.
Right.
But the majority of collectors do have no interest in a BCE. It's worthless to them, not just from a financial point of view, but from a collection point of view. They don't fill their collections with BCEs.
Okay, interesting. Because would an older book, like I'm always thinking of The Shining, wasn't that a club edition initially, or am I just thinking that?
Yeah, the only one that I know of that was actually released as a book club edition, and that is the only version of the book you can get, I think was, let me think off the top of my head, Secret Windows. Yes, that was a BCE.
Okay.
So there was never a first edition. It was only ever released as a BCE. So that's pretty much probably the only book that I have in my collection that is a book club edition, because that's the only version you can get.
Okay, interesting. Go ahead, Hans.
Yeah, if there were a not book club edition released of that book, would that still be the first edition, or would the book club edition be the first edition?
For me, the original would still be the book club edition, because that is the first one that was printed. It's a complicated world, collecting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Because I'm wondering how you do you place more of? I guess you're going with the novel's first printing, as in the original publisher. So you would value that book more than like a limited edition from Cemetery Dance then? Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's kind of almost a different thread to my collection. So I would value them equally. So I have my first edition collection and I have my limited edition collection. The limited edition collections then get sort of separated themselves. So you have what are now really termed gift editions, but are effectively unsigned limited editions. Then you have the signed limited editions. Then you have the lettered editions, which is normally there are only 26 or 52 of them, and obviously price goes up as you go down that line. So I have no lettered editions of any Stephen King books. Unfortunately, they are completely out of my price range. However, I would absolutely covet those. I don't know if it's been discussed on your podcast before, but the lettered edition of The Regulators is a superb book. I would love to own one of those. And the very famous Firestarter in the asbestos cover, that is a lettered. And again, I would dearly love to be able to own one of those, but I would have to do the lottery, I think, or the pools or something like that in order to afford one of those.
So first editions then, or first printing, sorry. See, this is, as a non-collector, I was getting kind of confused. I didn't realize that you were looking at the original publisher. So does it really, like, how do you, like when the book first comes out, that's all first prints generally, right? Or do you have to reserve to get that, or you just go to the store and everything works out generally pretty okay for you, especially like with recent stuff versus older stuff?
Yeah, I mean these days with the reputation King has got, when a book is released, his the number of first printings that happen are in the region of tens of thousands. So it's very easy to walk into a store and pick up a book and it will be a first edition. And those first editions, and again, I'm going by the UK market, those first editions probably last in stores for anything up to 2 to 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden you'll start seeing, especially in the more popular supermarket type stores, you'll see second printings, third printings, fourth printings, and so on. I know the Sleeping Beauties one that literally lasted 2 weeks before I could no longer find any first printings.
Wow. So do you have like a special relationship with a certain store where you say, please reserve me a first printing or something like that? Or
for a new novel, I tend to get my order in pretty early. As soon as someone like Hodder and Stoughton make the announcement, I will order the book. I tend to get an email saying, we're about to release a book. And I order a copy or multiple copies for other people as well. A lot of people ask me to pick up first editions of UK books. So,
okay.
Do you order them online then, or do you buy them in stores? You have to check out that they are okay and not.
Oh yes, yeah. I order online, but I always collect from the store.
Okay.
Interesting. So this might be a difficult question for you to answer. Do you prefer US covers or do you prefer the UK covers, or is it sort of on a book by book basis? Which ones you like better?
Yeah, it's mostly on a book by book basis, but I would say on the whole I prefer the US covers.
And why is that?
It's a good question. I tend to find them a little bit more interesting. Certainly the UK covers from around about the late 90s, early 2000s, they got very similar. They tend to put the Stephen King in the same font. It's very recognizable as a UK book. An exception to that probably would be Sleeping Beauties, because that's got a beautiful cover. The artwork on that is just fantastic. But there's a lot of range on the US books. They're very, very different. Each time you get different fonts, different layouts, and I much prefer that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you agree with that, Hans?
I also would say that it depends on titles. Some of the US are better than the UK and vice versa. So,
well, I definitely know that Revival was not.
Well, that's not one of my favorites. No,
the UK was much better.
I'd agree. The UK Revival was much better than the US Revival.
Yeah.
But then Bizarre of Bad Dreams, the US one was way better than the UK one. So it varies so much.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, though, that it's good that the UK do their own covers, because so many different countries just take the US covers and change the title to their language. And that, I think, is very poor imagination, because I love it when there's different covers. Even though if it's a cover that isn't as nice looking, I appreciate that it's a new cover that gives you some other angle of the story. So I think that's a good thing, though.
It seems also the UK covers, they follow a pattern for 2 or 3 books. So if you take something like Everything's Eventual, then From a Buick 8, they're very, very similar covers. And then, let me think, Liz's Story, Cell, Dew McKee, Just After Sunset, all of those, you could look at those and they'd almost be like a matching set, because the fonts are so similar and the layout is so similar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, as a completionist, I imagine that variants must be the bane of your existence.
Yeah. So, I would say that I was not a completionist. I have aspirations to be a completionist, but I never will be. There's just too much out there for me. But I am a collector of variants. So, if I can distinguish it that way. And yeah, variants are really interesting. There's a lot of collectors that don't collect variants, or aren't even aware of variants, or how many there are, and of the different types of variants there are. There are variants when it comes down to which company printed the book. So if you take something like Eyes of the Dragon, there are 3 different variants of that, because it was printed by 3 different printing companies. There are variants in covers. So a famous one would be probably Insomnia, where you have the red on white as opposed to the white on red, and a lot of people are aware of that. But there are a lot more subtle books out there that have there are a lot more books out there that have subtle variants. Some that I've kind of discovered as I've gone along, and I just happened to pick up a book and discussed it with somebody else, and they mentioned, well, mine's a bit different to that. Let me have a look at your cover, and you slowly work out what all these different variants are. And most of the time, I try to pick up each of the different variants of those covers or books.
And the record was breaking now with Sleeping Beauties, right?
Yeah, things got completely out of hand with Sleeping Beauties. For the benefit of the audience who aren't aware of this, in the UK, for probably the last, I think, 4 or 5 books, there have been different booksellers who have produced different covers. So the standard book cover has been sold in places like Waterstones, and that's the one produced by Hodder and Stoughton. But then W.H. Smith, who's a big bookseller in the UK, I think it was back with Dr. Sleep. I think that was the first one. They printed a more purple. It went all the way back to Under the Dome. I think, actually thinking about it, they started printing a purple cover, and it was exactly the same as the standard UK cover, but it had like a purple overlay on it, so everything looked a different shade of purple. And then they did that with the next book, and the next book, and the next book, and the next book. And then obviously places like Waterstones caught onto this and decided that they might make a little bit more money on as collectors by also producing different versions of the cover. And with Sleeping Beauties, under the actual dust jacket itself, you will find there are 4 different animals printed on the actual book itself. So you have a tiger, a snake, a fox, and a moth. And that meant there were 4 different variants. And then W.H. Smith printed their copy, and they also had those 4 animals, but those were in purple on the book cover. So now you have 8 different variants. And then on the day of release, a big supermarket chain in the UK called Tesco's suddenly decided that they were going to have their own cover, and they had a peacock. So now
Oh,
you
my
have
goodness.
9 different variants, which meant there were people in the US who were sort of emailing me and phoning me and saying, would it be possible for you to pick up all 9 of these books for me? So I think I ended up buying something in the region of 57 copies of this book.
Oh my
Wow.
God.
And it was a lot more difficult than usual. A, because of the number of variants. Normally, I just pick up a W.H. Smith and a standard first edition from somewhere like Waterstones. But because of the many different ones, I had to sort of travel around lots and lots of different stores. And obviously, because I'm buying these for collectors, they have to be absolutely pristine. So I'm saying to the owners of the store, do you mind if I check the book, and I've got this pile here. Do you mind if I swap the covers on this one, because this book has a bit of a dented corner, but this one doesn't. But this one, the dust jacket, has a bit of a crease. So I'm kind of building up perfect books whilst I'm in the store with these very, very helpful bookseller workers who so kind of just left me to it. It's like, no, go ahead, do what you like. It was quite amusing. So I'm walking out the store with my arms full of 10, 12 books at a time. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you send those to the US then?
I do, yeah. So one of the other things that people do contact me, because something like this with a variant that is actually under the dust jacket, if you ordered from the bookstore directly or from Amazon, you have no guarantee about which book you get.
Right.
So they wanted to be able to get the actual set of books, but also shipping overseas from UK book publishers is absolutely appalling.
Yep.
Hodder and Stoughton have a really bad reputation for this. They tend to pack their books in effectively cereal boxes with no protection on them whatsoever. And even the expensive signed limiteds, they do this, which is a crime, in my opinion. You're paying hundreds of pounds for a book. The least that they can do is wrap it well. And the smaller publishers like Cemetery Dance, like PS Publishing, they know how to pack a book. They know what a collector expects.
Definitely.
Yeah, and it would be dangerous. I mean, if they didn't, they would die out pretty soon, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they do it for a reason, but they still do it well. So part of that service, I suppose it is for me to really pack those books well and make sure they arrive in good condition.
So you have a couple of weeks' works when a new book is released done by going and buying this and packing them.
My post office sort of, every time I come into the post office now, they go, oh, new book's out, because they always ask me, they have to ask me for security reasons, what is it that I'm sending? And it's always books.
Sure.
So, yeah. So I've actually still got a big pile behind me for waiting to be shipped out. There's a couple of people who were also asking for another book, actually by Joe Hill rather than Steve King. So I'm waiting on those just before I ship them out. But I'm just looking around my office now. It's still full of books.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about shipping, because me and Hans have complained about this. I live in Canada. Even sometimes the shipping from the States to Canada, the shipping is more than the cost of the book, which just is a deal breaker for me. So I don't know, like when you're shipping these books, does the shipping cost more than the books? I guess when you're shipping, what would it be, 4 or 5 copies? Or would it be 9 copies per order?
Well, it would be 9 copies, yes.
Yeah, and did the shipping? I hope the shipping didn't exceed the cost of those 9 books.
As it happens, it was close. So if I ship, because the books were half price, so the books were £10 each.
Okay.
If I shipped 9 books, and Sleeping Beauties, as you know, is a big, thick, heavy book. If I shipped all of those with the standard post office, I think you'd probably be looking at around about £120 to ship, which is crazy. So I have found other shipping companies that do much better deals, much better rates on the heavier packages. So I think for 9 books it was around about the sort of £60-65 range. So still close. It's not cheap to ship.
Interesting.
You should do all these orders in once and pack them in suitcases, and instead of paying postage, you can buy a ticket to the US and go there and deliver them yourself.
Yeah, that would be good.
I'm trying to think, because King has experimented with so many different things. With the Green Mile, that must be an interesting case for you, because that was originally published as a serialized paperback.
Yes.
So do you consider the individual installments the first printings, or do you consider the collection, or do you consider both?
So yes, I absolutely consider the paper books to be the first printings, and I bought those as they came out. But then there is a sort of an edition that is the full book as a hardcover. Yep. So and that is still a first printing. So it is not the first printing of the story, but it is the first printing of that particular book. And then you have the Subterranean Press's limited editions as well. So that's a beautiful set, by the way. The Subterranean. I'm not sure if you've seen those, but
yes,
the green ones, and then there's the blue that is the signed limited. That's very nice.
All right.
How aware do you think the publishers are? If we go back to the Sleeping Beauty thing with the printed animals on them, do you think they do this because they know that, okay, now we get a bunch of people that's going to buy all 9 copies and we're going to make a truckload of money on those? Or do you think they do it just for a fun thing? Or how do you think the publisher, do you know how the publisher reasons about this?
No, I don't. I'm the cynic in me would say that they're doing it because they will get additional sales from people who will buy multiple copies. They might not buy them all, but potentially they would buy more than one. So I think they do recognize the fact that doing this gives them more revenue. Certainly from the sales, I would suspect, of the W.H. Smith variants compared to a book that was sold prior to W.H. Smith doing that, they obviously see greater sales of the book because it'll all go back to Hodder and Stoughton, because Hodder and Stoughton are the publishers of the book, and then you have the likes of W.H. Smith or the likes of Waterstones that then sell those variants. So Hodder and Stoughton would see an increase of sales because of that. So yes, I absolutely do think it's because they will see a much greater revenue by printing more of these variants. Mm. But I am absolutely crossing my fingers that the next book doesn't do this.
The Outsider.
The Outsider, yes.
Yeah. Yes. How far would you take this? Because I know I think it was Horse in Atlantis. I got a preview of the dust jacket, just only the dust jacket, no book, and that was before the last story was included. So on that dust jacket, the book is missing one story. Mm-hmm. Would that be considered a collectible thing, or is that because that's just a dust jacket? Is that where you draw the line, where you don't have the physical book?
No. So
or is that the version?
So that's interesting. So that, to me, that would be a proof dust jacket, because that's prior to the book going on sale. If I understand you right, you had a pre-release copy. Yeah. So
I didn't have a copy of the book, just the dust jacket. I don't think the actual book without all stories exists. I think this was just they did the dust jacket, and King then decided to put in the last story. I don't remember exactly the title of it, but so that dust jacket only have 4 stories on it, and then when the book was done, it has all 5 stories in it. So I don't think that there absolutely has to be a book that only have 4 stories. I think this might just be the dust jacket.
Just the dust jacket, yeah. So I would consider that a proof dust jacket, and there are collectors who collect proof dust jackets. There's one very famous collector, Bob Jackson. He has a proof dust jacket of the original Carrie, where instead of Carrie being written vertically down the spine, it's written horizontally. Mm. And that's just a one-off. I mean, as a collector or a completist, you will never be able to own that unless Bob Jackson sells it. So there are things out there that are one-offs, but that's not something I would be interested in because it's from a proof, and I don't collect proofs.
Yeah. How painful is it as a collector to know that you will never have a complete collection?
It's one of those things you just have to resign yourself for. everybody's collection's different, and everybody's collection's important to them. So it is, you can't look at one collection and say, that collection is better. It might be more expansive, but it's not necessarily better, because it's down to the individual as to how they define the boundaries of their collection. For me, I define that as first editions, UK, US, and as many limited editions of the novels as I can get. And I discount proofs and I discount anthologies. So, but I would include letters. That's just a financial restriction. I just can't afford them.
So, how many books do you like? I think you've mentioned the Carrie, but that's a one-off. Of how many first printing books do you not have at this point in time?
None. I have them all.
Oh, okay. So really, you have completed your collection.
I have definitely completed my collection of first editions, and I would also, I think I have all of the variants as well. There's potentially, let me think. No, I was missing the grey lettered Under the Dome, but I've recently just bought that. So yeah, I think I've got all of the first editions and all of the first edition variants. So the only thing really that I'm missing is some of the signed limiteds.
Okay. And how do you organize your books in your room? Do you have like one wall of US editions and another wall of UK, or do you put the two editions side by side?
Well, Hans actually has seen it, because I sent him a photograph, which very nicely won me a signed limited book. So again, thank you, Hans, for that. But I used to have a bookshelf in the corner of my room, which was kind of double stacked with books. So I had all my US version editions at the front, and because of lack of space, I had all the UK ones behind that. And then on my 50th birthday, there you go, giving my age away again, just almost 2 years ago, my wife very nicely offered to, or allowed me, I suppose is the word, she allowed me to have a bespoke bookcase built. So it basically fills the whole corner of that room.
Wow.
And it was specifically designed to house my Stephen King collection of books. I even had a space specifically made for the very large, my brain's gone dead, I can't think what it's called, Knowing Darkness.
Yes.
The huge one.
Yes, the art book. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, we both have it. Yeah.
So there was a space in my bookshelf made specifically to house that.
Well, it's a big book.
It is a huge book. Yes, absolutely.
It's gorgeous print. So
if there's a new book that size, you have to rebuild your bookcase.
Yeah, so that's quite a sore point, because Paul Sundup, who I know you had on recently,
right.
I was lucky enough to get one of the lettered editions of his rebound of The Eyes of the Dragon.
Oh, nice.
And of course, he produced a portfolio that went along with that. And the size of that portfolio is perfect to sit next to the Knowing Darkness book. But unfortunately, I didn't leave enough space. So now I have to leave it in its box at the moment. I don't really have a place to put it because it's too big.
Right.
So I cursed Paul and he apologized. Said, if you told me a year before you knew you were going to do it, when I had my bookcase built, then I would have left space. I never thought there'd be anything as big as that again.
No.
So what does your family think of your collection?
My wife has reached a level of acceptance. So I no longer get raised eyebrows every time there's a knock on the door and the postman delivers me another book. My children, I have two boys, one aged 20 and the other 21 and the other aged 23. The youngest has a keen interest in my collection. I think he has an eye on it for future profitability, shall we say. He's always inquiring as to the value of certain books, so I'm not sure how long they're going to stay in existence once I've left this earth. But from a family point of view, nobody understands it. They don't understand my desire for books. Hence the reason I frequent the sites like the Dark Tower, because you need to have conversations with like-minded people. Otherwise, you just think you're crazy.
Yeah.
Does anybody in your family read Stephen King besides you?
No, not to the extent. My wife probably read a few of the books in sort of the 80s, 90s. I don't think my children have ever read any of the books. I've tried so many times to get them to read The Dark Tower.
Yeah, it hurts,
It does. But to be honest, I kind of shy away from that, of saying to people, you've got to read this, because I don't want them to not like it.
Yeah.
And then come back to me and say, no, I didn't like it. And I'd have to say, then you're crazy. Because it is one of the greatest things ever written. But no, nobody really shares the same sort of level of passion that I have. They read books, right, but they're not Stephen King fans.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious, did you get the Art of the Dark Tower book?
I did, yes.
Yes, I thought we both were rather impressed with it.
Yeah, it's a nice coffee table book.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about the film? Do we want to go there?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. We've both talked. Always glad to hear another opinion.
So I went to see the film. I actually went to see it on my own because nobody wanted to go with me. So I sat in the cinema on my own, and I had low expectations.
Yeah.
But I knew the fact that it was another arc to the story. You know, it was another round with the horn and so on. So I kind of allowed it to be different to what I was expecting from the main story in the books. Mm-hmm. I just felt that it was way too rushed. I thought they tried to cram far too much into it in too short a space of time.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, whereas it was just fantastic. I absolutely loved it.
Yes, and we just like on Netflix Gerald's Game, which I really liked generally, except for maybe the last 10 minutes, and we're going to review 1922 today as well. So
1922 I have just watched. I watched it about 3 or 4 days ago. I really like that. I think that the best adaptations of Stephen King's work is when they don't mess about with the story. And 1922 is a very faithful reproduction of that story. I think that's a really good film. Gerald's Game, I started watching the first 10 minutes and was pulled away for some reason, so I still need to watch the rest of that. But from what I saw, again, fairly faithful adaptation.
Yeah, these are good times with all these new platforms for media to come out on. I think a lot of King's less flashier works, I guess, from a cinematic point of view, I think they're the things like Netflix and Hulu are the perfect platform for those stories.
And Mr. Mercedes was absolutely wonderful. Have you seen that?
Yes, you'll have to listen to our last podcast. We had split opinions about it.
Okay, right, I'll go back and listen. I really enjoyed Mr. Mercedes.
So did Hans.
So did I. Yeah. Going back to collection, as you mentioned, you have filled your collections with the first edition. Do you feel that itch to start collecting something more that you don't have?
Yeah, so I have a secondary collection, which is books about Stephen King and his work.
Oh, yes.
Which are a lot easier to get hold of. They're certainly a lot cheaper. But again, I still follow the same sort of format that I'm trying to get everything as a first edition, first printing, which some of the earlier ones are a little tricky. So I've got a big spreadsheet somewhere. I think at my last count there is around about 130 books printed about King and his works.
Wow.
Some of them are better than others, to be fair.
Sure.
But I think, and again, they get printed in limited editions. You get lettered editions. George Beam is a really good author of books about King. So I think I've amassed about, I think at the last count, around about 80 books about King and his works.
Wow.
And again, because they are a lot cheaper, I do have a reasonable collection of letters of those. I have about 15 lettered books. And again, they're beautiful quality books. The publishers really go to town on those. from the point of view of the wooden cases, the leather bound, the bindings are very superior. They're very nice books indeed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you read all those about King as well?
I haven't read them all, to be fair. I've probably read less than 20% of them. Because they, again, a lot of them I'm trying to keep in the condition that I buy them. So it's a lot more difficult to find a reading copy or a Kindle version of those. So I have to read them carefully.
Yeah, and basically, if you're fair, it's the same story in all the books with
there's
different angles maybe and so, but it's basically the same story in every book.
Absolutely. Occasionally you get a different insight, or they look at it from a different angle. They look at it from the films of Stephen King, or there's only so much you can say about his life story. Once you've read a couple of books on his life story, you pretty much know everything.
Yeah, interesting. So this might be too difficult, but I'll throw it out to you anyhow. Most favorite and least favorite covers.
Covers. That's an interesting one. That is. I would say favorite cover would probably be Pet Sematary. I really like Pet Sematary.
Good choice.
It's a really nice cover. And my least favorite, it as well. God, there's too many. My least favorite, My Pretty Pony. It's god awful.
Oh, okay. You agree, Hans?
Yeah, well, I like the US Nightmares and Dreamscapes with a Scarecrow.
Yeah,
that's a nice one.
I really like that, and I really like the one for Duma Key, the US as well. Mm-hmm. I think that's great as well. So there's a lot of great covers.
Yeah, definitely. I like some of the minimalistic ones, like the silver one for The Shining, the black one with the blood drip on Salem's Lot, and there's another one that's escaping me at the moment. But some of those minimalistic ones are just, I don't know. You grew up with them. It's like when I was younger, I always had paperback editions of most of the books. So when I tried to find the hardcovers, I was disappointed if there was a variation between the two. Mm.
Yeah,
and like the stand, like with the crow and the eye superimposed on it. Yeah, that's the other one.
Yeah, and the thing that I collect is one copy of a book in every language that King has been translated into. And,
every language.
Yes, but only one book in each language, not all books, just one in each language, and that's very interesting because I mean some of those covers are so ugly that they are. I mean you just want them because they are so ugly. and stuff like that. So that's very interesting. So I think the covers are extremely interesting.
So I know of there's a collector on the Dark Tower org who collects every different version of the Dark Tower. And I think he has somewhere in the region of about 550 books of all different languages. Whenever there's a new release of the book in paperback, with a different cover, he will collect that. He has an amazing collection of Dark Tower books.
So all 8 of them in every version you can get?
Yes. Yeah. And all the different reprints as well.
Oh, okay.
That's amazing.
I have 2 editions of the Gunslinger. But they're both like the large size paperback format. Actually, my first 4 books are the large paperback format, and then I finally went to the hardcover. I don't know why. I just never seemed to see hardcover editions when they first came out.
I think of the Gunslinger, I think I've got 5, maybe 6, because I've got the first printing, and then the first printing with the slightly different cover.
Right.
Then there's the third one that was part of a box set. Which is a very different cover. Then I have the UK first, which is paperback, and I think I have the US first as a paperback as well. Maybe another one as well that I'm trying to think of.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, some of those earlier covers are still the best ones to me. When I go into the bookstore now and see with the paperbacks, they're very minimalistic and they're really ugly. I just can't stand what they've done to some of the covers.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, now I've thought of that. That's probably one of my favorites as well. The Michael Whelan cover on the Gunslinger is a great cover.
Yeah.
And I'm in this case, I'm actually happy that I don't have that much money, because I could see myself getting totally caught up in this collection thing as well if I had the money. But since I don't, I have to restrict myself to different things. So that's a good thing. But I wanted to ask you also, now that Stephen and Owen did a signing tour in the US, they signed the books sometimes in blue pen, sometimes in red pen, and I know for at least one book, Stephen signed his own name and Owen's name, and Owen signed his name and Stephen's name. Are those also different versions of the book that a completist would need to have?
No, I don't think we would cover those under a variant. To me, a definition of a variant is any book that is, and I wrote this down, so excuse me while I read this out. A variant is any book that is published as a first edition, but may have something slightly different when compared to other first editions sold by the same publisher.
Okay.
So it would have to be a book that you could actually buy in the shops. It was produced, the differences were produced by the same publisher. So they've introduced those variants, those variations themselves, rather than somebody coming along after the fact and signing the book or doing something to the book that would make it different. It has to be, from my point of view, a variant has to be something that the publisher has introduced. So, for example, as we said before, the red on white or the white on red for Insomnia. So they were deliberately done by the publisher.
Sounds like a healthy rule.
Yeah, otherwise you can just get crazy.
And 9 copies of the same book is nowhere near crazy.
But I to be fair, I don't have all 9 copies. I've drawn the line on that one. It's just got silly. I probably would. It's not a cost thing because the price of the books, as we said, is very cheap. It is a space thing for me now. I just do not have the space to have 9 copies of the same book, unfortunately.
How that's interesting, because then you go from, you have the previous book in all versions, and then you come to this book and you won't have all versions, and then if the next book is released in, say, 3 versions, you might get complete of that. Isn't that going to nag you that you don't have the complete set?
It probably will, but right now I'm kind of learning to live with it. I'm hoping if this turns out to be a complete anomaly and they're not going to do this craziness again, then I might go back and get all of the books and then just store them somewhere else until I move house and have a bigger room to put them in. If they continue to do that, for me, and I know for a lot of other collectors as well, this is kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, but it's just too many. There are still people out there that are collecting them and collecting full sets. And even beyond those 9, that you could continue with the variations because there are things like airport editions. I'm not sure if you're aware of an airport edition. That's where on release of the first edition of the book, they produce a book. They produce a variant of it for an airport, which is a soft cover because it makes it lighter for when you're in the airplane. It's easy to read. They have a version of Sleeping Beauties, and I've only seen so far 1 tiger. So I'm not sure if there are all 4 animals, but I know there are collectors out there trying to find out if there's another 4 variants that they don't have.
Yeah, I remember read, I don't know if it was on Dark-Tower.org, someone buying what looked like a galley, a UK galley on the airport.
Mm-hmm. No, it wouldn't be a galley. There is a book. So when you open the front cover, rather than it being printed on the cover itself, it's actually printed on the inside of the first page. Is the picture of the tiger. There was the proof of Sleeping Beauties, and again that's probably one of the best quality proofs that have been released for a while now, and that had French flaps and all the animals on that as well.
Yeah,
that's being sold for quite scary money.
Yeah. So it's a crazy world out there for collectors. And,
it is. It is. You have to define your collection, I think. Otherwise, it's just non-ending.
For sure.
Yeah.
I'm wondering now, as a collector, what brings you the most satisfaction? Is it the procurement of the book, or is it just like sitting in your room and looking at your bookshelves and enjoying the fact that you have all these books? Or is it the hunt? Or
a lot of it is the hunt. The actual, these days, let me put it in a way. These days, if a new book comes out, I kind of get the book and it goes on my shelf, and I will read it on a Kindle. For the older books, and these days that tends to be more of my sort of sub collection books about King, where I'm actually daily hunting for books that I don't have. That's a great enjoyment, the hunt and trying to find it. And when you do find one, that's a great pleasure. But I also get a huge amount of satisfaction of just looking at my collection as a whole. I'm fortunate that it lives in my living room. So when I'm sitting on my sofa at night, I can just sort of turn to my right and I can see my collection. And I often find myself just sort of staring at it. So I get enjoyment from both. I get a lot of
sitting there with a scotch and just soaking it in.
I'm not a Scotch man, but I do soak it in. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. Is there any questions or anything that you wanted to say that we haven't asked you about?
No, I don't think so. I think pretty much covered everything.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Have you ever thought about actually starting a business where you send out these UK copies? I mean, it sounds like there's a really big market for it, and maybe.
No, I don't think I'd enjoy doing that as a business. The reason I do it is because I get enjoyment from helping a fellow collector out. When somebody has gone to the trouble of getting a book for me from the US, packaging it and sending it to me, I'm extremely grateful. So I know how it feels to have someone do that for you. So to be able to do that for a fellow collector is a great thing. I have to put a limit on it because otherwise I would literally be doing it all day, every day.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time. I mean, packing books up, individually wrapping those books up in bubble wrap and finding a box and filling that box with stuff to make sure that the book it arrives in a good state. It does take time. But I don't really enjoy the packing bit of it. I enjoy that I've done it to help somebody else, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I can
Absolutely.
imagine carrying a couple of packages with nine copies of Sleeping Beauty in each to the post office isn't all that fun either.
No. Yeah. And I absolutely do it for no remuneration whatsoever. I mean, I don't ask any more than what it costs to package the book, to ship the book, and the price of the book, and I'm more than happy about that. But having said that, there have been times over the last couple of years where people have been very generous back to me because I've done this for them. They've sent a signed book, which has been great. So recently, one of the collectors that I sent over all 9 of the books for, he went to one of those signings with Owen and Stephen King, and because he was able to get an extra copy, he sent that to me, which
awesome.
is incredibly generous. So it's a win-win situation for me. I don't expect it, but I'm extremely grateful when it happens.
Yeah.
When King toured Europe, were you able to attend any of his events?
Yeah, I went to Paris. So that was quite an interesting story. I said to my wife, "Would you like a day in Paris?" To which she said, "Great, yeah, lovely." And I said, there's one little catch. You might be standing in a queue for an hour or so because I'm going to see Stephen King. So she sort of rolled her eyes and said, yeah, okay, fine. And we ended up standing in that queue for, I think, about 3 hours.
Wow.
And we were probably within the last 50 to get through the door. So I was quite lucky for that. But the beauty of that tour was he would sign any book. So I took along a couple of Dark Tower books for that.
Cool.
I also saw him when he was in the UK, I think for the, which tour was that? That would have been... Lizzie's Story, yeah. So, again, he would sign any book for that as well. So,
yeah. You and Hans might have even been there together, not even realized
it.
Well,
be, yeah.
I was in London in 2006, and I was actually in Hamburg when he was in Europe the last time. So,
okay.
Yeah.
It's because those visits are so few and far between. It's well worth the effort to get.
Yeah, absolutely. I was hoping maybe that he will eventually do a tour with both his sons, because that would be really awesome. They don't even have to have a book; they just have to be on the stage together. I think that would be really cool. But,
so Joe Hill is touring at the moment. He's come to Birmingham, which is just down the road from me.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I'm not a Joe Hill collector. I've read a few of his books, but I know there's a lot of people who are. So I will be attending that and picking up a couple of books for them.
Sweet. Yeah. He does England quite a bit.
Joe seems to spend a lot of his time in England. He certainly does the book tours around here.
Yeah, that's good.
I would love to go there and see him, but I can't get there, unfortunately. But he did a live Q&A on Facebook, and actually someone from Sweden sent in a question asking him if he was going to come to Sweden, and he actually said yes to that. But I don't know if that was something he has planned, or if he would have said yes to any country. I don't know, but hopefully that would be cool if he came to Sweden.
Yeah, cool.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, we really appreciate your time. I hope you had fun.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Great. Yes, we're at an hour, so it must have been.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. We got a podcast already done. We're done.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can edit all the rubbish that I've spoken and just keep the good bits.
I think it was all good, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it was very nice to meet you, Simon, and enjoy your collection. And if I was a collector, I think I would be of the same mindset for you. I think collecting first printings is probably the most... makes the most sense out of all the limited and lettered and deluxe editions. I can understand why. I think I subconsciously I actually do try to get first printings myself, but I never really realized it until I started talking to you.
I mean, from a beginner's point of view, if you're just starting out on a collection, I would absolutely recommend that you kind of work your way backwards, picking up first printings of the newer books, because they're all obviously easier to get.
Right.
But I mean, things like the first 5 Doubleday books, they have a reasonably high price on them, and they're quite difficult to get in collectible condition. But they are out there, and you can pick up a bargain every now and again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say if anyone out there is thinking about getting into collection, give it a serious thought, because if you do, there's no turning back.
Oh, yes, it's a very slippery slope.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you pick Stephen King. He's so prolific.
Yeah.
If you pick another author that's got 3 books, then you're in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Simon, and for sharing your passion with us. It was pretty awesome.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Goodbye.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This is great. What's our job? We'd like driving around and pick up stiffs or what?
It's time for reviews from the night shift.
Okay, and now we are going to talk about the latest and the last, as far as we know at least, thing coming out from Stephen King this year. And that is the movie 1922 that has or is now available on Netflix.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is an interesting movie because this one, it flew right under our radar almost. We know that we heard that it was being made, and we heard that Thomas Jane was playing the lead. Then we heard nothing, and then we heard that, it's done. And now it's out on Netflix. And I'm still surprised about that, because if you look at all the other movies that's been done this year and TV shows, there's been very much promotion online. There's been very much fan photos of people who have been visiting the sets and stuff like that. And even the cast has been posting some photos. I realized after this has premiered that there were some photos on Instagram and stuff like that, but it wasn't as much as the others. Where I mean, when they filmed the house on Neibolt Street, I mean, you couldn't even go online without seeing that house. So it's very different. But now it's out, and we have both seen it. And do you want to tell me your impression of it?
Well, I thought it's a very slow burning type of story, but I thought that the production values of the movie were fantastic. It looked like it was from the time era. Some of those old cars were really cool. And the standout was Thomas Jane as the main character. He affected almost like his jaw was wired approach to his role, and that his mouth hardly ever moved. Yeah. But it seemed to work for the character, and I totally bought him as this farmer from this era. And I thought the rest of the cast played their parts really well also. And the rats were really well done as well. So it's not a story that's going to jump out and freak you out, but it touches on some pretty heavy stuff and how damnation of your soul and things of that nature. It's got a Telltale Heart vibe to it, and the things that he's hearing and seeing sometimes with the rats is in his head as opposed to actually being there. And it's not something that I think was going to wow everybody, but I thought it was just a really solid, well done piece of adaptation of a Stephen King material with a much more nuanced type of story and more of it's really an old school horror story, and I really enjoyed it. I wasn't bored at all, and I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, I agree. I really liked it as well. I did have some problem with Thomas Jane and his speech. Being
when you're watching it, do you watch it in English or translated, sub-dubbed?
Well, if I would watch it on Netflix here, I would have subtext to it. But I got the preview copy from so that didn't have any text. So I just had to listen, and I had some problems hearing everything he said actually, and both from the dialect he had, and also that he clenched his jaw shut, so it was harder to hear what he actually was saying. So, and I think it benefited his character because it made him more of that type of character. But on the other hand, as a viewer, it made it harder to follow the story, I think, or what he was saying. And he had such a thick dialect, and the other cast members or the other characters didn't. And I mean, I think they would have, if they would have toned him down a little bit and toned the other up a little bit, so they had about the same dialect, I think that would have been more effective to me, because he felt a little bit out of place now compared to the other characters. I mean, this is 1922. I don't think that it isn't a far-fetched thought that his wife were from around the same town as he was, and his kid was definitely from the same town. And I think that they would have about the same dialect. So that bothered me a little bit. But it's really no big thing. But since I had some trouble hearing what he said, I got a little upset with it. But otherwise than that, I really don't have anything to complain on. Maybe I actually listened to the audio version of the story pretty much just a couple of weeks before I saw it. And maybe it's going a little fast in the movie, that when he convinces his son to help him kill the mother. But that's always the case in a story. You can always develop it more, and you can always get the feeling and the thoughts of the character in another way that you can't really get into the screen. So if I hadn't read the story just before I saw it, I don't think I would have picked up on that. But I got a little bit feeling that he agreed to it kind of easily to kill his mother. But other than that, I really enjoyed it, and it's well done, and it's definitely a different movie. I think it's not what you're used to.
Yeah.
And that I really like.
Yeah, I thought they actually spent enough time on the father turning the boy. Like, they had quite a few scenes with them either talking out in the field or whatnot. Where it jumped a little too fast for me was after the son ran away with the girl, and then his descent into his madness and like the jump into winter. That was and then it kind of rushed from that point. But minor complaint, because I really enjoyed it, and I'm hard pressed to say whether I liked this one better than Gerald's Game. I think they're pretty close. I really enjoyed both of them.
Yeah, it's definitely a great movie, and everyone should definitely watch it.
Yeah, and it seems like the media, the technology has caught up to a point where it makes filming these smaller Stephen King stories more economically feasible. So it's pretty fantastic, and we might see more adaptations of shorter works from Stephen King on these types of services, and that's something to look forward to and be very happy about.
Yeah, definitely.
So definitely worth checking out, especially if you rent or subscribe to Netflix. I mean, you've already got the service, you might as well watch the movie.
Yeah. Also, in the last episode, I decided that we should pick our favorite. Do you remember?
Our favorite
adaptation and favorite book of the year from the two that's been released. But since we are not reviewing Sleeping Beauties in this episode, but the next one, so let's save the books for next time. But from the adaptation, we have The Dark Tower, we have It, we have The Mist TV show, we have Mr. Mercedes the TV show, we have Gerald's Game, and we have 1922. Which of these do you think is the winner of this year?
Oh, definitely It. But it's a little unfair to, it's definitely It. Even though I still don't like the setup of the climax with the kidnapping of Bev. Everything else about that was really well done. So that's where my vote would go.
And your least favorite?
My least favorite would be The Mist.
Okay. Well, I actually have two other choices.
Well, that's not fair. You didn't tell me them. Oh, you mean the ones you gave me? Okay.
Yeah, of the ones you gave. Okay. No other movies.
Okay. You're pulling a fast one on me.
Yeah.
A dollar baby or something.
Yeah, exactly. No. My least favorite is actually The Dark Tower. And I think that maybe it is as bad as The Mist. But I think that one, the disappointment that came with it because of even though they were low, but still expectations and having been waiting so long for that movie, I think that one was the low point of this year for me. And my favorite movie is actually Gerald's Game. Not that I don't like it. I think it's a great movie, and it's definitely a very good movie. But I think I really liked Gerald's Game. I think it stuck to the story. They solved every angle of that book that is a very hard thing to solve, I think, because so much happened in her head.
Yeah.
But they translated that in a perfect way to the screen, and the acting and everything. So I definitely think Gerald's Game is the winner of this year.
Oh, that's a very interesting choice. And I can understand it, especially from an acting perspective. Carla Gugino and Bruce Greenwood really, really did fantastic jobs with their roles. But I think the kids in it were really, really, really good too. So
yeah, I think one of the things that also might have tipped it over to Gerald's Game, because it is my number 2, was that I think I had the expectation that it would be a superb movie from everything we saw beforehand, and I wasn't as sure with Gerald's Game. So I think it was a good movie, but I was expecting a good movie, so it wasn't such a wow feeling to it.
Yeah.
While Gerald's Game, I didn't really know what to expect, except that it would be a hard movie to film. So I think that unconsciously I was prepared to be a bit disappointed, but instead I was very glad with it. So I think that actually made it a more positive experience.
Right. Well, that's interesting. It'd be interesting to hear from their listeners what their favorite and least favorite adaptations of film or movie or TV were this year. So feel free to send us in and let us know what you think.
Yeah.
So that's all we're going to have for this episode, but I just did want to, and I mentioned to Hans, I had just a quick review on 2 publications. One is a reprint of the Creepshow comic book from the movie, and it's I can't say I don't have the original copy, but this reprint of it is really well done. It's got all the vignettes from the movie in it, and they follow either the movie or the comic they both follow each other fairly closely. So it's a lot of fun. It reminds you of those old EC comics, and it's really quite enjoyable. And I'm glad that I've got this back in my collection. I'm really happy about that. And the other one that people are probably not as familiar with is the Entertainment Weekly put out a Ultimate Guide to Stephen King, and it's not. It's only about 80. It's just a magazine format thing. It's about 80. It's about 96 pages, I guess. The back inside cover's got a nice picture of Pennywise, but they basically cover all the movies. There's some photographs that you might not have seen. They're talking about Sleeping Beauties. There's an excerpt from that. They talk about Pennywise. They talk about adaptations, the connections between all of King's works. It takes a little look into King himself and some of his greatest hits: Carrie, The Shining, Misery, The Mist, and Stand By Me. And then it also, one of the cool articles it has is, what about the kids? Actors who once portrayed children in Stephen King's R-rated films speak out. So that's pretty cool. And there's a visual index of his publishing empire, which is pictures of not of all, but they basically list it's a bibliography of all the books and movies and TV adaptations that have been done. And then the last one talks about by the numbers, talks about significant numbers in his life. Like, for instance, his box office of his 10 highest grossing movies, adjusted for inflation, is $1.2 billion. He got $2,500 advance against publication for Carrie. The hardcover price of Carrie was $5.95. 13,000 copies sold of the original hardcover. 1 million copies sold of the paperback the first year. Of course, they talk about 1999 when King nearly dies. There was, at one time, he had 3 books on the Publisher Weekly's best-selling list, and that was in 1981. It was Firestarter, The Dead Zone, and The Shining.
Wow.
So, and there's also did you know this? There was an Indian television adaptation of it in 1998 called Whoa.
Wow.
W-O-H. Yes.
That one I would love to see.
Yeah, so that might, I don't know if we can dig that one up. Indian television adaptation of it, 1998. W-O-H is what the title is. So
that one shouldn't be impossible to find. I mean,
No.
that late internet was available, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. What else we got here? 15 times King has cameoed within his own movies. So there's, for the diehard fan, you're not going to find a lot in here, but there was a couple of nuggets, like that thing about that Indian adaptation of Indian TV adaptation of the It. I never knew about that. So it's pretty cool.
Seeing that one would be worth the price of that one alone.
Yeah. So if you're in your local books chapters, you might find this on the newsstand. It's almost the same color as the Creep Show. It's a red with King's letters or names in white letters. So, and it's got like a montage of picture of the Christine, Andy in red from Shawshank, Carrie, the 2017 It, Jack Nicholson's at the back. Got Misery with the sledgehammer. I'm blanking. Kathy Bates and John Coffey on it. So if you're a big King fan and know a lot about him, you're not going to find a lot new, but I just thought it was cool that there was 1 or 2 things in there that I wasn't aware of. So
yeah, definitely. The one question, the Creep Show one, the characters in that one looks very much like the one in the film, right?
Pretty well, except because maybe I'm just so used to him now. But Ted Danson obviously didn't have white hair back then, right? So
yeah.
So when you see him on the beach, I go, "Oh, is that supposed to be Ted Danson?" I guess so, but his hair is brown in the comics. So, but yeah, everything else is pretty close, so it's pretty good.
Yeah, so I think that one was done at the same time as the movie, so they.
And the art's done by Bernie Wrightson, so.
Yeah, that alone is worth buying it for.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a mission to find the Indian version of It.
Yes.
And seeing that and reviewing that.
Hopefully it has subtitles.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, they have a picture of the clown on it. He looks more like a hobo than a clown, so that's interesting.
Wow. That's interesting. I've never heard about that actually, so.
No, I hadn't either until I bought the magazine. So for that alone, I'm happy to have picked it up.
Yeah, definitely.
And again, if anybody out there is familiar with this TV series, please tell us if it's possible for us to get a hold of it.
Yeah. Was it a long TV show or was it just a couple?
It doesn't say. It just says Indian TV series, so who knows? And who knows how closely it follows the story, too, right?
A couple of thousand episodes, show daily.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's it for this time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And next time we're going to talk about Sleeping Beauties and review that one.
Yep.
And maybe something more. We'll see.
Yep.
We don't know yet, but...
Yep. For the first time, things are loosening up a little bit.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. We can talk about speculating on the outsiders. I still think Holly is going to show up in that story because I think that name has a title has a double meaning, but we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, he has mentioned that someone familiar would show up.
Right.
And if that is her or if it's Ralph Anderson, who is actually the one from Storm of the Century, we don't know.
Right. Interesting.
So
yeah,
it should definitely be. I think it would be interesting to see.
Maybe it's both of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to see what happened to Ralph after Storm of the Century.
Yep.
So that would definitely be a fun thing to see.
Yeah. So that is all for this show, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I thought the interview with Simon was pretty fantastic. A lot of fun listening to him explain his obsession with collection. And as always, stay safe.
But
stay scared.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye. The end.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Cool.